My dad named me Scott Allen Wadsworth because at that point in his life, he thought that every man's initials should be able to be converted into a cattle brand. My dad was in his cowboy phase. He consigned me to life as a carpenter, and no part of my 48 years as a carpenter has been more fully sort of described than the saws, S-A-W, saws, that I have loved and used and made a living with. This little collection of saws evidences change over time. So my question for us today is something I've been thinking about and talking about with my friend Cy Swan, and that is this. How much should we be prepared to change as we pass through our adult lives? Let's say that change as a child is inevitable. Growth, and we morph into new people and new strengths and new knowledge and new relationships. Of course we change as children. But Benjamin Franklin famously said that most people die at about age 23 and don't have the decency to lie down and be buried until around 76. And what he was saying is that people calcify early and become so committed to the way I do things because, darn it, it's the way I do things. Their confirmation bias overwhelms us. Our confirmation bias overwhelms us and we become rigid and inflexible and not interested in getting better. Something that has been a blessing to me in my life is the people I've met and the examples they've presented to me of characteristics that I could adopt. You've had the same experience if you're keeping your eyes open. We all have that experience because humans come in all shapes, sizes, and flavors with our own individual strengths and weaknesses, including within ourselves. So the question that Cy and I were talking about this morning is how different are we at, now me at 67 and him at 87, than we were at 27? And have we made the mistake that Ben Franklin said is so ubiquitous of not changing, remaining essentially immobile and thus dead until they finally put us in the ground? One of the things that jumped out at us in our conversation was, darn it, old men weep easier. We weep too easy. You've probably heard me in these videos, my voice quivering at the end when I say things that on their face are not emotional at all, but at another level make me quiver. Cy's the toughest man I ever met. That old boy's voice will quiver now, and he will say he would have been horrified as a young man to do that. Now, as a young man, I visited with a young man friend of mine, Charles Anderson. He's 20 or 21. He's on a mission in Ecuador. That's tough duty. And he closed his email to me with, "Conditions are prime for growth." Thank you for that, Charles. Conditions are prime for growth. That's what life does for us, right? It gives us conditions that are so uncomfortable, in some cases so painful, that it's either grow or die. It's either become better and smarter and more well-rounded, or just retreat and build the wall a little higher and shut out a few more people and stop taking chances on relationships and continue to do things in the same old way. If that would have happened in the construction world from, circa 1940, when Thor, the predecessor to Skill, developed this wonderful 60-pound adaptation that obviated an 8-point handsaw in most cases, 7-point, whatever it is you like to use when you got to use one, then Skill would have never, emerging from Thor, refined and streamlined. This was my first Skill saw. I had a gun pulled on me over this saw at one particular juncture, a story for another day. One day I saw a skyhook, a primitive skyhook, and I thought, yes, that would be nice. And so this served me, this did a fine job for a long time. And then Skill continued to make it lighter. Is there some part of our personalities that we could make lighter? Are we too heavy in our homes? Are you leaning on your wife too hard in an unreasonable way? Or perhaps the thing that we as men can relate to the most is, are you leaning on your sons too hard? Or are we a little too lazy to exert ourselves to actually discipline them with love and in a consistent and effective way, and we just let them run amok. They're kids. Not worth my time. I've got my habits, I've got my interests, and we miss that opportunity to change the world for good through our kids? Or do we, as some dads, make the mistake of dominating? Might makes right. I'm big, you're small. I'm fast, you're slow. I'm smart, you're dumb. And we reinforce that in our children? If we are, we have to stop that. We have to stop that. We have to recognize that it's our responsibility as we think about how conditions in our lives are primed for growth. What circumstances can we create as we're changing that are primed for growth in the lives of our kids and our loved ones? Who among us is smart enough to recognize that? Probably none of us alone, or very few. But we can go back and access the wisdom of people who have struggled through the opportunities for growth in their lives and been successful at it. They have written things down. Franklin also said there's only two ways to be remembered in life. And one is to live a life worth writing about, and the other is to write a book worth reading. Well, read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. It's a book worth reading. That boy was ready for growth. There's been a long list. Scriptures are full of stories of people who had opportunities for growth thrust upon them, and some of them grew and some of them shrank. So I'm thankful that my friend back east sent me this example of skill saws in antiquity. And I'm thankful that I used and I made a living for, 15 years with this old beast. And I'm thankful for the lighter frames that came along, and now the Mag 77, which I love so much. And then this iteration. I did a review on this, contrasting it to this saw. They're both great saws. They're different saws, but there's growth. I'm tempted to close my mind to this one. We're tempted to close our mind to change. And if you're doing that, if you're functioning only off your confirmation biases, I'm as sorry for you as I am for myself when I do that. Can we look around ourselves and be self-aware enough in the same way that we have to be self-aware to stay alive on a job site? You have to be self-aware enough to see the threats and the risks and the dangers and the shipwrecks that are poised and ready to happen. In the same way we can learn that skill, we can learn the skill of looking around us and saying, where in this is there an opportunity for growth? If you're a praying man, you simply ask God, Father, how can I grow here? If you're not that, there are so many places that you can go, or just meditate a little bit and become introspective and say, where is the opportunity for growth? If we don't do that occasionally, we are not living our lives. We're just spending our days. And whether you're buried at 27 or 76 doesn't make much difference. 3 things before I wrap this up and forget them. First, mentors. Don't expect to find a mentor if you're not self-aware enough to humble yourself enough to honestly and openly ask for input. If you haven't learned that yet, don't waste the mentor's time, because they don't cross your path all that often. And when they do, you got to be ready to ask authentically, have you got any advice for me? Do you know me well enough now to see where I'm stepping on my tail? And then when they say something, don't excuse your actions. Don't say, yeah, well, I know, or well, that's because, don't do that. So prepare yourself so when that person or people cross your path, they'll take a second to invest in you. The next thing is seeking out the best books. Not every book is equal in value. Not every podcast is equal in value. Don't waste your time with the things that you know right off the bat are not going to lead you to a better place. We don't have enough time for that. With the demands of life that are unavoidable, our discretionary hours can't be wasted on that which will not provoke growth. But we do. We doom scroll. We get drawn off into any number of things. Stop it. Wadsworth, Use the days you've got left to improve the days that are ahead. So let me just throw out 2 or 3 books that have been helpful to me, and understand this is so far from exhaustive because I don't remember, especially with the camera running. But in the front of my brain, the first one that I think of is something called The Anatomy of Peace by the Arbinger Institute. There's a companion book, in fact, maybe the prequel, Leadership and Self-Deception. And these books helped me recognize how I was scapegoating in my own mind, blaming my reactions in situations on the actions of others, sort of framing myself as a victim. It showed me how the unconscious assumptions about balance of power, I can't tell you exactly how, but when I closed those books, I understood better how I, as Buck and Billy Ray Smith would say, you are the problem. I am the problem. It helped me think those thoughts. I've mentioned just previous biographies, Benjamin Franklin's biographies of Abraham Lincoln. Holy smokes. Up from slavery. Holy smokes, I have nothing to pity myself about, which is a wonderful revelation. I quote all the time C.S. Lewis, and a lot of my reading has been Christian apologetics. I love it. I love it so much. And the things that Lewis has written about humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. Can you see the wisdom in that? Even if you don't read him for his Christian apologetics, even if you just read him for the wisdom that applies in every walk. And so I'm going to run out, but I'll talk about other books in future days. But I'll just tell you that some authors, Orson Scott Card has become a dear friend because of the way that he suspends a moral dilemma and lets me see my own flawed or good choices in the moral dilemmas that I face. So seek out of the best books wisdom. Wisdom, will you? Seek out the mentors and prepare yourself to be mentored. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman. Keep up the good work.